A little girl bursts through the wrong door, crying so hard she can't breathe. She doesn't run to police. She doesn't run to family. She runs straight to the most feared man in the city, the Mafia boss, and grabs his coat like it's the only safe thing left. Everyone freezes, because children don't come here unless something is truly hunting them. Then she blurts the reason she's being chased, and the boss's face changes in 1 second. Not anger. Not surprise. Something colder. Because what she says connects to a secret from his past that was never supposed to resurface. And the moment he understands who he is, the boss doesn't negotiate. He storms out. The city had a way of pretending it was civilized. In daylight it wore glass towers and clean sidewalks, cafe umbrellas and carefully planted trees. At night it slipped into its older skin, the one made of debts and favors, whispered names and locked doors. In that older skin, one name sat at the center like a weight pressing everything down. Adrian Villaro did not need to raise his voice for a room to change temperature. He did not need to threaten, because his silence already carried the memory of what happened when he decided to move. Men built myths around him to comfort themselves, as if a story could be negotiated with. Some called him a businessman, others called him a criminal, but everyone agreed on one thing: when Adrian Villaro chose a direction, people stepped out of the way. That evening he was in the top floor of a private club that overlooked the river, a place designed for men who never waited in lines. The lighting was soft enough to forgive ugly truths. The windows were high enough to make the rest of the city feel like a model someone could rearrange. Adrian sat at the head of a long table, hands relaxed, posture easy, as if the whole world were a simple ledger to be balanced. He listened to reports from his lieutenants and watched them the way a surgeon watched an instrument tray. Not with affection. With precision. He had learned long ago that emotions were expensive. They created gaps people could crawl through. The meeting was nearing its end when the door opened without permission. It was not a small sound, the way most doors opened here. Most doors knew their place. This one snapped wide as if kicked by desperation. Security moved first, 2 men in black stepping toward the threshold with the smooth certainty of those paid to be obstacles. Adrian did not move. He watched. A little girl ran in. She was too small for the polished room, too out of place against the expensive wood and the cold shine of glass. Her hair was tangled, pulled back in a hurried tie that had started to slip. Her cheeks were wet, eyes wide and red-rimmed, her whole body shaking as if she had been running in freezing rain. She moved with the frantic straight-line logic of a child who had chosen one point of safety and would not be redirected. She did not stop at the guards. She did not look at the other men. She ran directly toward Adrian. One of the guards reached for her shoulder. The girl flinched as if touch meant harm. Her small hands came up instinctively to protect her head. That reflex alone was enough to change the room. Adrian's hand lifted slightly, a minimal gesture that carried the authority of a gunshot. The guard froze. The girl reached the table and braced herself against its edge, chest heaving. She was crying so hard her breath kept catching, turning her fear into a series of broken attempts at air. She looked up at Adrian with the raw intensity of someone who had no other option left. Adrian had seen men beg. He had seen women bargain. He had seen people collapse into prayer when they understood there was no negotiating with consequences. But a child's terror was different. It was pure, unfiltered, not shaped by pride or performance. It was survival in its simplest form. Adrian leaned forward slightly, just enough to bring his face into her line of sight. He did not soften his expression, softness was often mistaken for permission. But he did not harden it either. He gave her stillness, the one thing she seemed to need. The girl's gaze flicked toward the door as if she expected it to explode inward. Her lips formed words that did not come out cleanly because she was shaking too much. She tried again, and this time something in her tone cut through the room like a blade. It was not the exact words that mattered as much as what they carried, that someone was coming, that someone dangerous was close, that she had been running from him for what felt like forever. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Around him, his men began to shift, reaching quiet conclusions. In this city, people did not run into a private club without knowing what kind of trouble they were inviting. A child did not do it at all unless the world behind her had become worse than the world in front of her. Adrian's gaze dropped to her hands. Clutched in her fist was a small object, a metal chain that wrapped around her fingers like a lifeline. At the end of it was a pendant, dull gold, shaped like a tiny oval locket. It was scratched and old, the kind of thing someone kept for reasons that had nothing to do with beauty. Adrian's attention sharpened to a point. He had seen that locket before. Not in a pawn shop or on a stranger's neck, but in a memory he kept locked away because it cost too much to touch. The locket had once rested against the collarbone of a woman who had smiled as if she believed the world could still be kind. A woman who had known Adrian before the city turned him into a weapon. The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the building itself had shifted under the weight of something returning. Adrian held his hand out, palm up, not as a demand but as an offer. The girl stared at it like it might be a trick. Then she loosened her grip enough for him to see the back of the pendant more clearly. There was a mark on it, faint but unmistakable. A tiny engraving that looked like a simple flourish to anyone else, but to Adrian it was a signature. A private symbol, the kind you used when you wanted to prove something belonged to you without saying it out loud. Adrian's mind moved fast, assembling pieces. The woman from his past. The locket. A child the right age to be connected to a timeline he had tried to bury. And a pursuer, a man the girl feared enough to run into the lion's den rather than let him catch up. The girl's breathing slowed a fraction as she realized the hands reaching for her were not striking hands. She spoke again, words tumbling out in fragments, the way truth came out when fear dragged it forward. It was about a man who had been watching her house. About footsteps outside her window. About a voice she recognized from nights when she had hidden under a bed and listened to adults argue. About a guardian who was not safe, who had promised protection but delivered threats. About a promise her mother had made, and a warning she had left behind, and the locket being the one thing the man wanted more than he wanted the girl. The reason was not a simple one. It was layered with secrets, with a past that had not stayed dead. Adrian felt something he had trained himself not to feel. Not pity. Not sympathy. Something sharper. Something personal. He understood suddenly that the girl was not being chased by a petty criminal or a random predator. She was being hunted by someone who believed the locket was a key. And the girl herself was proof. Across the table, one of Adrian's lieutenants shifted as if preparing to speak. Adrian lifted a finger, stopping him without looking away from the child. Adrian stood. The movement was so abrupt the chair scraped softly against the floor. Every man in the room went still, reading the change in him the way sailors read the sea. Adrian was not a man who acted on impulse. If he stood like this, it meant the world outside that door had just become his problem. He stepped around the table and toward the girl. His coat hung perfectly on his shoulders, and yet he looked less like a gentleman now and more like a storm given human form. He crouched slightly so the girl would not have to tilt her head back to look at him. His gaze cut again to the door, calculating distance, timing, angles. The girl flinched as a sound came from the hallway, muffled but real, hurried footsteps, a voice raised, security responding. Adrian's jaw tightened. He placed a hand lightly on the girl's shoulder, a steadying weight that said she was no longer alone. Then he straightened. The men around him were already moving, instinct and training activated. A door was being secured. Phones were coming out. Weapons were being checked discreetly. But Adrian did not bark orders. He did not need to. His presence was the command. He walked toward the exit with a purpose that made the air feel thinner. The reason had reached him. The locket had reopened a locked room in his mind. And the idea of a man hunting a child with that pendant in her hand did something Adrian had not experienced in years. It made him want to destroy. He did not wait for his car. He did not wait for explanations to be neatly delivered. He pushed through the door into the hallway where his security had formed a barrier against a frantic staff member and a man in a cheap jacket insisting he had urgent business. Adrian's eyes landed on the man. The man's face changed as if he recognized death, wearing a tailored suit. His confidence drained so fast it was almost comical. He tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. Adrian's expression did not change. Only his focus did. The city had just offered him a target. Adrian moved past his security as if they were not there, and in a voice too calm to be anything but dangerous, he demanded to know where the rest of the man's team was, who had sent him, and how long they had been following the child. The man's lips trembled. He stammered answers that did not fully form. Adrian did not wait for full sentences. He turned, already walking, already storming out, because the most important truth was clear enough: the girl's pursuer was not alone, and the hunt would not stop at the club doors. Adrian's hand tightened into a fist at his side. Behind him, the girl's small footsteps pattered as she tried to keep up, protected now by men who suddenly looked less like guards and more like a wall. Outside, the night air hit Adrian's face. The city lights shimmered on the river like scattered coins. Somewhere out there, a man believed he could reach the girl first. Adrian Villaro stepped into the night like a verdict. Adrian's convoy moved through the city with the quiet efficiency of something practiced. There were no flashing lights, no roaring sirens, no dramatic spectacle. Just black vehicles slipping between traffic like shadows that did not need permission. People in the street felt the presence before they understood it, heads turned, shoulders stiffened, instincts warning them to move aside. In the back seat of Adrian's car, the girl sat rigidly, hands still wrapped around the locket chain. One of Adrian's men had given her a bottle of water, but she held it without drinking. Her eyes tracked every passing street lamp, every storefront, every alley mouth, as if she expected the darkness to produce the man she feared. Adrian watched her reflection in the window. He did not ask questions the way ordinary people asked questions, spilling concern in a way that made children feel interrogated. He measured. He listened to what she did not say. Fear like hers was not born in a single afternoon. It came from repetition. From the certainty that escape was temporary. He had his people pulling information already. Names. Addresses. Camera feeds. Calls placed to men who owed him the kind of debts no one discussed aloud. The city, in Adrian's hands, became a network of nerves feeding him sensation. But the girl's presence in his car did something stranger. It made him remember what he had once been before power calcified him. It made him remember a woman's laugh, a warm hand on his wrist, the way she had insisted he could choose a different life and had almost convinced him. Her name had been Maris. Maris had not belonged to his world, which was exactly why she had felt like oxygen. She had worked in a small accounting firm, smart and careful, always noticing the details others missed. Adrian had met her through a clean business front, back when he still pretended certain parts of himself could be separated. She had looked at him once with eyes too honest and asked him what he did when he wasn't wearing expensive suits. He had lied. Then he had stopped lying, because Maris had made lies feel heavy. She had known what he was, eventually. She had known and still touched his face like he was human. That kindness had terrified him more than enemies ever had. Because kindness was a risk he could not control. Maris had vanished from his life years ago, swallowed by the same city that made promises and broke them. Adrian had told himself she left because she was smart enough to run. He had told himself not to look too hard for her because he would only drag her deeper. Now, in the dim interior of his car, a child clutched Maris's locket. Adrian's phone buzzed with updates. One of his lieutenants had identified the cheap-jacketed man from the club hallway. Not a professional. A runner. A middleman who answered to someone higher. The name that surfaced next was one Adrian had not heard in years but had never forgotten: Kellen Roque. Roque had once been a cop. Then he had been something worse, a man who learned the law was simply another tool if you held it correctly. Roque had built his own little empire between official authority and criminal leverage, collecting favors from both sides. He had been one of the few men who could operate in Adrian's city without bending the knee. Years ago, Roque and Adrian had crossed paths over a shipment, a territory line, a disagreement that ended with bodies and a temporary truce. Adrian had assumed Roque eventually aged out of relevance or found another city to poison. Apparently, Roque had found something else to hunt. Adrian looked at the girl again and understood the shape of it. If Roque wanted the locket, it was because the locket contained something. Not sentimental. Practical. Proof. A key. A name. A code that could open a door that should stay closed. The convoy turned off the main roads and into a quieter stretch of industrial streets where warehouses slept behind chain fences. Adrian's safe house was not luxurious. It was clean, secure, built for function rather than comfort. No one expected to be safe there unless Adrian wanted them safe. The car door opened and Adrian stepped out, scanning the area automatically. His men formed a moving perimeter. The girl hesitated before exiting, staring at the building like it might be another trap. Adrian did something he never did in front of his people. He held out his hand again. The girl looked at it, then at his face, searching for the lie she had been trained to expect. Finding none, she placed her small hand in his. It was a small contact, but it landed in Adrian's chest like a weight. Inside, the safe house smelled faintly of metal and old wood. The girl was guided to a room with a couch and blankets and a soft lamp. Adrian's staff brought food, but she only stared at it, appetite erased by adrenaline. Adrian sat across from her, not looming, not crowding her space. He set a small recorder on the table, not to intimidate but to remember. Details mattered. He needed the truth clean. The girl's name, he learned, was Lena. Lena had lived in too many places for someone so young. She spoke of a mother who had been careful, always checking locks, always warning her not to trust easily. The mother had hidden the locket and told Lena it was important. The mother had told Lena that if anything happened, if Lena ever felt unsafe, there was one man she could run to, one man whose name she should never say out loud unless she had to. Lena had not understood why until the mother was gone. Gone, not in the clean way that adults explain to children with gentle voices, but in the harsh way Lena had discovered with her own eyes. A home emptied too fast. A closet cleared. A smell of bleach. A new adult in charge who smiled in front of teachers and tightened his grip in private. Lena's guardian had been appointed through paperwork that looked official enough to silence questions. The man called himself her protector, but his protection had come with rules that felt like cages. Lena had tried to do what good children did. She had tried not to make trouble. Then she had found something. A folded envelope tucked inside a vent. A list of numbers. A name repeated in a way that made it feel like a confession. Lena had not understood the meaning, but the guardian had seen it in her hand, and his face had changed. After that, footsteps began outside her room at night. Phone calls happened behind closed doors. Lena heard her own name spoken like a problem to be solved. And then, earlier that day, Lena had heard the guardian on the phone speaking to someone with a low, confident voice. The voice mentioned the locket. Mentioned the need to retrieve it. Mentioned a deadline. Lena had run. She had run with nothing but her coat, the locket, and the one name her mother had insisted she remember. Adrian Villaro. Adrian sat perfectly still while Lena's story poured out in pieces. When she finished, she looked exhausted, like her body had been carrying too much fear for too long and had finally found a place to set it down. Adrian's mind was already moving ahead. If Roque was involved, it meant this was not a simple retrieval. It meant Roque believed Lena was leverage or evidence. It meant the guardian who had adopted her was not a caregiver but a gatekeeper. Adrian's phone buzzed again. A message came through with an address linked to the guardian. Another message confirmed Roque's current circle and his known safe spots. Another message, colder, included a detail that made Adrian's blood feel like ice. Surveillance had spotted a second team near the club, waiting outside. If Lena had not slipped past them, they would have grabbed her before she ever made it inside. Adrian exhaled slowly. He had spent years building his world so nothing surprised him. The city bent. People obeyed. Threats were contained or erased. But this was different. This was someone reaching into his past, using a child as bait. Adrian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the industrial street. Somewhere nearby, engines hummed. Men waited. The night held its breath. He made a decision that would change the balance of the city by morning. He ordered his people to locate the Guardian, quietly, immediately. He ordered a lock on every exit out of the district. He ordered eyes on Roke's known associates. He did not scream. He did not dramatize. His calm was more frightening than rage. Then he looked back at Lena, who sat curled into herself on the couch, locket still clenched in her fist like a prayer. Adrian knew one more thing now, something he could not avoid. Lena had not just run to him because her mother told her to. Lena had run to him because, instinctively, she believed the world Adrian controlled was safer than the world that claimed to protect her. That was an indictment of the city. And of Adrian himself. Outside, one of his men approached with news. A car had been seen circling the block. Unmarked. Slow. Not lost. Roke's reach was already close. Adrian's expression hardened. He walked toward the weapons locker built into the wall, opened it, and selected the tools he rarely needed anymore because fear usually did the work for him. Tonight, fear would not be enough. Roke had decided to hunt in Adrian's territory. Adrian decided Roke would learn what it meant to wake the storm. The first move happened before dawn, because the city was easiest to manipulate when most people still slept and the few who didn't were too tired to ask questions. Adrian's men moved in layers. Some watched the Guardian's house from a distance, documenting comings and goings. Some tapped into traffic cameras to track any vehicles tied to Roke's circle. Others went where information lived, in bars where men talked too much, in offices where paperwork hid crimes, in quiet corners where bribes moved like blood. Adrian stayed at the safe house, close enough to protect Lena and far enough to command the board. He barely sat. His mind was a constant current, his body charged with a kind of controlled aggression that made the room feel tighter. Lena slept in short bursts, the way frightened children did. She woke at every unfamiliar sound, eyes wide, searching the corners. Adrian's staff tried to comfort her gently, but comfort without safety was just another lie the world told. Adrian did what he could not believe he was doing, he kept watch himself. In the hours before sunrise, he stood in the hallway outside Lena's room, listening to her breathing. He told himself it was strategy, that the safe house might be compromised, that his presence was an additional security layer. But deep down he knew it was something else. It was the refusal to let history repeat itself. At some point, his lieutenant brought him the envelope Lena had mentioned, retrieved from the Guardian's home by a man who knew how to move without being seen. The envelope was old, creased, but intact. Inside was a set of account numbers and names, arranged like a map. One name appeared again and again. Kellen Roke. The list wasn't just money. It was connections. It was a record of who paid Roke and who Roke protected. It was proof that his empire was not built on rumors but on transactions. It was the kind of evidence that could topple careers, ruin politicians, and burn down networks that pretended to be legitimate. Adrian's eyes narrowed as he scanned the pages. He understood immediately why Roke wanted the locket and the girl. The locket was likely the key to the rest of it, a storage code, a hidden drive, a safety deposit box. The list in the envelope was only the visible part of the iceberg. The part beneath the water was what Roke would kill for. Adrian also understood something else. Maris, the woman from his past, had not simply vanished. She had been fighting. She had been collecting proof. She had trusted no one except, in the end, Adrian. That realization hit Adrian like a quiet blow. He had spent years telling himself Maris had left to save herself. But the truth was uglier, she had stayed in the city long enough to be caught in its teeth. The sun rose pale and cold. By late morning, Adrian's men had located Roke's current base of operations, a renovated office building that pretended to be a private security firm. Cameras on every corner. Guards with military posture. The kind of place built to intimidate anyone who walked near. Adrian could take it by force. He had the men, the weapons, the will. But force was loud. And Loud gave Roke a chance to move Lena again, to hide his tracks, to burn evidence. Adrian needed precision. He sent a team to retrieve Lena's legal files from the state offices, and another team to identify which clerk had pushed the guardianship through so quickly. He sent a third team to quietly pressure Roke's financial conduits. Money was a vein, cut it cleanly and the body weakened. Roke responded in the only language he knew. That afternoon, a vehicle approached the safe house. Not fast. Not reckless. It stopped at the edge of the street as if the driver wanted to be seen. A man stepped out holding a plain envelope and walked forward with hands visible. Adrian watched from behind glass. The man did not look like a thug. He looked like an employee. Clean shoes. Neutral expression. The kind of man you used to deliver threats because he could walk into places without setting off alarms. Adrian allowed his security to intercept him. The man handed over the envelope without protest and left the same way he came, calm as if he had done his job and expected to go home for dinner. Inside the envelope was a photograph. Lena's school. The playground. A snapshot taken recently, from a distance, the angle wrong in the way surveillance photos were wrong. On the back, a short message was written in neat letters. It did not need explicit words to be clear. Roke knew where Lena had been. Roke had eyes. Roke was telling Adrian that walls could be climbed and locks could be picked. Roke was not asking for negotiation. He was offering a warning. Adrian's face did not change, but something in him tightened. He recognized the move for what it was. Roke was trying to provoke him into making a mistake. Adrian did not make mistakes. He changed the safe house pattern immediately. He moved Lena to a secondary location, one even fewer people knew. He rotated guards. He cut communications down to essential channels. He created silence. And then something went wrong anyway, because betrayal was never loud until it was too late. It happened in the evening, during a routine relocation between rooms. Adrian's most trusted security detail moved Lena through a back hallway that led to an underground garage. The garage was sealed, monitored, controlled. But control relied on humans. Humans relied on loyalty. Loyalty could be bought. The lights flickered once. Not a full blackout, just a brief stutter. A second long enough for cameras to lose continuity. A second long enough for a door lock to reset. A second long enough for two men in maintenance uniforms to step out of a side stairwell that should have been empty. Adrian heard the commotion from upstairs and moved instantly, body already in motion before his brain fully processed what was happening. He reached the stairwell as the alarm finally screamed, a late cry of recognition. He arrived at the underground level to find his men on the floor, not dead, but stunned, incapacitated with practiced efficiency. A van's engine roared. Tires squealed. The garage door was lifting, impossibly, because it should not have opened without Adrian's authorization. Adrian sprinted, gun in hand, but the van shot out into the street like a bullet escaping a chamber. For a fraction of a second, Adrian saw Lena's face through the back window. Her mouth was open in a silent cry. Her hands were pressed to the glass, the locket chain visible against her wrist like a fragile line holding her to him. Then the van turned the corner and vanished into the city. Adrian stood in the garage breathing hard, eyes fixed on the empty street beyond the half-lowered door. His men scrambled, shouting into radios, but their voices felt distant, muted by the sudden, violent clarity of what had happened. Roke had taken her. Adrian's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. His pulse hammered. For the first time in years, his calm cracked not into rage, but into something colder. He turned and looked at the access panel near the garage door. He studied the lock's override history. He saw the code that had opened it. It belonged to someone inside. Adrian's eyes lifted to his security chief, a man who had served him for a decade. The man's face was pale, stunned. He swore he did not know how it happened, swore he had followed protocol. Adrian believed him, and that was what made it worse. Because it meant the betrayal was higher, smarter, deeper. Roke did not just want the locket. He wanted Adrian destabilized. He wanted Adrian reactive. He wanted Adrian to chase. Adrian walked away from the garage without a word, steps measured, shoulders steady. His men followed, unsure whether to fear his anger or his silence more. In a private room upstairs, Adrian opened a hidden compartment and removed the one item he had kept from the past he pretended did not exist, a photograph of Maris, smiling in sunlight as if she had never seen darkness. He stared at it for a moment, then placed it face down. His decision was made. He would not negotiate. He would not barter. He would not pay. He would dismantle Roque piece by piece until the city itself had nowhere left to hide him. And when Adrian found Lena, the storm he brought with him would not stop at Roque's door. The city reacted to Adrian's shift like an animal sensing a change in weather. Phones rang. Men changed locations. Businesses quietly closed early. Even people who did not know names felt tension in their bones, the way birds felt pressure drop before a hurricane. Adrian did not waste time on public displays. He moved like a surgeon. First, he cut Roque's communications. Not all at once, not dramatically, but selectively, targeting the channels Roque relied on most. A courier was intercepted. A burner phone network suddenly went dead. A trusted driver disappeared for a few hours and returned shaken, refusing to answer calls. Information became fog. Second, Adrian targeted Roque's money. Accounts were frozen through backdoor influence. Cash drops were compromised. A shipment of valuables Roque expected never arrived. In a city like this, money was oxygen. Adrian began thinning the air. Third, Adrian hunted the traitor inside his own circle. He reviewed access logs. He watched footage frame by frame. He tracked who had been near the panel, whose behavior changed in the days leading up to Lena's capture. He did not accuse loudly. He waited for the guilty to reveal themselves in small mistakes. The answer came in the form of a quiet panic. One of Adrian's newer lieutenants, a man named Cardin, attempted to leave the city that night. Not openly. Quietly, with a bag and a driver and a route designed to avoid checkpoints. The attempt alone was a confession. Adrian's men stopped the car before it reached the outskirts. Cardin was brought back alive, sweating, eyes darting. Adrian did not need to torture him for the truth. Fear of what Roque would do to him had already done most of the work. The details came out in fragments, and each fragment sharpened Adrian's focus. Roque had offered Cardin a deal. A promise of protection. A share of power. And the threat that if Cardin refused, Roque would expose enough to destroy him. Cardin had been weak enough to believe there was a safe path between two predators. Cardin revealed where the van had gone, an old shipping yard by the river, now mostly abandoned, used sometimes for private transfers because the city's officials rarely checked it. Roque owned a piece of it through a chain of shell companies. Adrian's gaze did not flicker. He absorbed the information like a man absorbing coordinates. Then he did something that surprised even his closest men. He did not execute Cardin. Instead, he used him. He arranged for Cardin to be seen, alive, outside the shipping yard, as if he had delivered what Roque wanted and had been rewarded. It was bait. Roque would not trust it completely, but Roque's arrogance would not allow him to ignore it. Adrian assembled a small team, not an army. He left the rest of his men to maintain control of the city, to prevent Roque's allies from causing distractions. When Adrian moved, he moved with intention. The shipping yard at night was a skeleton of industry. Metal containers stacked like tombs. Cranes that loomed like dead giants. The river nearby carried the city's lights in broken reflections, making the water look like it was full of shattered glass. Adrian approached without headlights, vehicles stopping far enough away for stealth. His team moved on foot, shadows among shadows. He could hear the distant hum of a generator, the faint clank of metal somewhere inside. Then he saw security. Men stationed on corners, weapons visible, posture disciplined. Roque had built defenses, expecting an assault. Adrian did not assault. He infiltrated. His men slipped through gaps in fencing, moved along container rows, used the environment like a maze they had memorized. 2 guards went down quietly, incapacitated rather than killed. Adrian had no desire to create noise that would push Lena deeper into hiding. He found the center structure, a warehouse with a side office and a second story. Lights glowed behind dirty windows. A vehicle was parked near the loading bay, engine still warm. Roque was close. Adrian's body remained steady, but his mind was alive with calculation. Every step mattered. Lena's life might be measured in seconds. Inside, the warehouse smelled of oil and damp wood. The air was cold. Footsteps echoed faintly, and Adrian adjusted his pace to avoid rhythm that could be tracked. A sound came from the upper level, soft and broken. A child's whimper. Adrian's focus sharpened so hard it felt like pain. He moved up the metal stairs, gun raised, senses narrowed to a tunnel. His men covered angles behind him. At the top landing, a hallway stretched into darkness. A door at the end was shut, light seeping under it. Adrian approached. Before he reached the door, it opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, face calm with the kind of confidence that came from believing he held all the power. Kellen Roque did not look like a cop anymore. He looked like a man who had learned to enjoy being feared. Roque's gaze landed on Adrian and did not widen with surprise. That was the first sign he had expected this. Maybe not the exact path, but the arrival. Roque's expression carried something like amusement, like this was not a crisis but a test. Adrian's body held stillness that hid violence. He did not need to speak to communicate. The air between them felt charged, crowded with history and threat. Roque shifted slightly, as if positioning himself so Adrian could see past him. Lena was inside the room, tied to a chair, face streaked with tears, eyes swollen from crying. The locket was no longer in her hands. Adrian's stomach dropped in a way that made him feel briefly human, and he hated it. Roque's lips moved in what was clearly a taunt, though no direct words were needed to understand. He was explaining the terms, the locket, the rest of the evidence, the key to whatever Maris had hidden. Roque wanted it all. He wanted Adrian to hand it over or watch the child pay. Adrian's gaze flicked to Lena, and in that flicker was a promise. Not reassurance. Not comfort. A vow. Then Adrian moved. The movement was sudden, violent, precise. Roque reached for a weapon, but Adrian was faster. A shot cracked the air, not aimed to kill but to disable. Roque stumbled back, grunting, his arm jerking as the weapon clattered away. Adrian closed the distance and struck, driving Roque into the wall. Roque's head snapped sideways. The warehouse echoed with the impact. Men surged from side rooms, weapons up. Adrian's team responded, the hallway becoming a tight, brutal corridor of motion. In the chaos, Adrian pushed past Roque's collapsing defenses and entered the room. Lena's eyes locked on him, terror and hope tangled together. She struggled against the bindings until the chair scraped the floor. Adrian cut the ropes fast, hands steady. Lena stumbled forward, shaking, and clung to his coat like it was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Adrian held her for 1 second, only one, because more would make him careless. He guided her behind him, placing his body between her and the doorway. Roque, injured but alive, staggered into the room, rage cracking his composure. He lifted his uninjured hand, and in it was the locket, chain wrapped around his fingers like a trophy. The way he held it made Adrian's vision narrow. Roque had taken it, and with it, whatever key Maris had hidden. Roque believed he had won something. Adrian's eyes stayed on the locket as if it were the center of the universe. The memory of Maris rose in him like fire. The thought of Lena alone in fear, hunted, used, pulled at something he had tried to cut out of himself long ago. Adrian made a choice. He did not chase the locket in that moment. He did not lunge impulsively. He prioritized Lena. He signaled his men to extract. They moved immediately, pulling back through the warehouse with Lena protected in the center. Roque shouted something after them, fury spilling out, but Adrian did not turn. Outside, the night air hit them like liberation and danger at once. Vehicles started. Doors opened. Lena was placed in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, shaking but alive. Adrian got in beside her, eyes fixed forward. Roque still had the locket. Roque still had whatever it opened. But Roque had underestimated something. He had assumed the locket was the only leverage. He had forgotten the simplest truth about storms. Storms did not bargain. The days that followed were not peaceful, but they were controlled. Adrian kept Lena hidden, safe, surrounded by people whose loyalty had been tested through blood and years. Lena began to sleep longer, though she still woke sometimes with a sharp intake of breath, eyes searching for footsteps that weren't there. Adrian watched the way she tried to be brave. Children who grew up in fear learn to make themselves small, learn to read adult moods like weather forecasts. Lena thanked people too quickly, apologized too often, flinched at sudden sounds. These were not the habits of a child who had been protected. They were the habits of a child who had survived. Adrian carried that knowledge like a stone. Roque, meanwhile, tried to turn his loss into a victory. He leaked rumors that Adrian was vulnerable now, that Adrian's empire could be manipulated through a weakness in human form. Roque attempted to recruit Adrian's enemies, promising them access and advantage. But Roque's recruitment came too late. Adrian had already begun dismantling Roque's network from the inside out. With the envelope list and Cardin's confession, Adrian had names, payments, patterns. He fed carefully selected information to carefully selected people, investigators who owed him favors, journalists hungry for a scandal big enough to make their careers, officials who wanted Roque gone but lacked proof. Adrian did not do it out of civic virtue. He did it as a form of execution. Roque had built his power in the gap between law and crime. Adrian began to close that gap around Roque like a vice. First, Roque's security firm was raided. Not because anyone suddenly cared, but because the right paperwork appeared on the right desks with the right urgency. Computers were seized. Files were copied. Men were arrested. Second, Roque's allies began to fall away. Politicians denied knowing him. Business partners claimed ignorance. Friends stopped returning calls. Power was often just proximity to safety, and Roque's safety was evaporating. Roque responded with escalation. One night, a vehicle exploded near one of Adrian's warehouses, not destroying it fully but sending a message. Another night, a sniper shot out the windows of a club Adrian controlled, injuring no one but shattering the illusion that Adrian could keep violence contained. Roque wanted Adrian to lash out publicly, to start a war that would draw law enforcement pressure onto Adrian and force him to retreat. Adrian did not give Roque that satisfaction. Instead, Adrian tightened the net. He located the safe deposit box the locket opened, not by brute force, but by watching Roque. Roque was injured, under stress, paranoid. Paranoia made men predictable, they returned again and again to what they believed was their lifeline. Adrian's men tracked Roque's couriers until one of them visited a private bank downtown at an hour when most people weren't there. Adrian did not storm the bank. He did not threaten the manager. He simply ensured the manager understood that refusing cooperation would ruin the bank in ways money could not fix. The box was opened. Inside was a small drive and a set of documents, sealed and labeled in Maris's careful handwriting. Adrian's throat tightened when he saw her script. The sight of it made the years collapse. Maris had left a full record. Payments, recordings, names, photos. The envelope list had been only the first step. This was the whole skeleton of Roque's empire. Maris had tried to build a trap. And she had succeeded, even in death. Adrian sat alone in the safe house office with the documents spread before him. He read until his eyes burned. He listened to recordings that made his jaw clench. He watched video evidence that showed Roque's cruelty not as rumor, but as reality. By sunrise, Adrian understood that Roque had killed Maris, directly or indirectly, because she had become dangerous. Adrian understood that Lena had not only been hunted for what she carried, but for what she represented, the last loose end, the last witness, the last living piece of Maris's defiance. Adrian also understood something he had avoided for years. His world had made people like Maris believe the only way to survive was to become as ruthless as the predators around them. That truth was not flattering. It did not allow Adrian to pretend he was separate from the rot. Lena wandered into the doorway that morning, rubbing sleep from her eyes, holding a blanket around her shoulders. She looked smaller than ever in the pale light. Adrian looked at her, and his decision finalized into something irreversible. He would end Roque. Not with a clean bullet. Not with a quiet disappearance. He would end Roque in a way that removed him from the city entirely, stripped his protection, shattered his myth, and ensured he could never hunt Lena again. Adrian arranged the final move. He used Maris's evidence to trigger simultaneous pressure points, warrants, asset seizures, indictments. He ensured Roque's most important allies received enough of the evidence privately to panic. Panic was contagious. When powerful people panicked, they trampled anyone below them to reach safety. Roque's network collapsed in hours. Roque tried to run. Adrian's men tracked him to a riverside motel on the edge of the city, a place with peeling paint and a parking lot full of tired cars. Roque had no convoy now, no confident posture, no amused calm. He was alone, carrying a bag and the weight of a burning world. Adrian arrived in a single car, not an army. He stepped out into the damp air, the river nearby swallowing sound. He walked to Roque's motel door and waited. When the door opened, Roque's face hardened into something ugly, a last attempt at control. He held a gun, hand shaking slightly. Adrian did not rush. He looked at Roque with the cold clarity of a man who had already decided the outcome. Roque's mouth moved, spilling threats, accusations, promises of revenge. He tried to speak Lena's name like a weapon. He tried to remind Adrian of what men like them did, of what the world required. Adrian listened without reacting, then lifted a phone and played a recording. It was Maris's voice, calm, measured, explaining what she had gathered and why. She spoke of Lena. She spoke of fear. She spoke of the city's rot like a thing she refused to accept as normal. Roque's face changed, and for the first time, fear appeared in him as something real rather than tactical. He understood that the evidence was no longer hidden. He understood he was not bargaining for survival now. He was watching the final door close. Law enforcement vehicles appeared at the far end of the motel lot, headlights washing the cracked asphalt in harsh white. Roque's shoulders tensed, his gun lifting again. Adrian stepped back, not retreating in fear, but making space. He wanted Roque taken alive, processed, displayed, stripped of myth in a courtroom. Death would have been mercy, and Roque had not earned it. Roque made one last decision, not heroic, just desperate. He turned as if to flee through the back window. Adrian moved fast enough to prevent it, not by killing him, but by disarming him and driving him down onto the floor. Roque fought like a cornered animal. Adrian held him there until sirens and boots and handcuffs made the ending official. When Roque was dragged out, screaming and twisting, Adrian did not watch with satisfaction. He watched with a tired heaviness, because endings always came with costs. The cost came later. Adrian returned to the safe house and stood outside Lena's room. He listened for her breathing, steady now, deeper than before. He knew what would happen next. With Roque gone, the city would reorganize. Power did not vanish, it shifted. Adrian's enemies would test him. The law would look closer now that evidence had surfaced. People would ask why Adrian had he. Would destroy Roque if Adrian himself was clean. Adrian could not keep Lena safe if Lena remained tied to him. He had built his life to survive. But survival was not the same as safety for a child. So Adrian arranged something no one expected from him. He created a legal identity for Lena that could withstand scrutiny. He connected her to a quiet family far from the city, people who had no interest in power and no ties to his world, people whose love would not come with conditions. He ensured they were protected from a distance, invisibly, in ways that would never make Lena feel trapped again. On the day Lena left, she stood at the safe house door with a small bag and a new coat that fit properly. Her hair was combed, her face cleaner, but her eyes still carried the memory of what she had lived through. Adrian looked down at her. He placed the locket in her hand. He had taken it back after Roque's arrest. The chain glinted in the light like a thin thread connecting past and future. Adrian closed Lena's fingers around it gently, a gesture that was both apology and farewell. Lena clutched it, then hesitated, as if she wanted to say something huge and didn't know how. She leaned forward and hugged his coat, the way she had in the warehouse, the way frightened children hugged lifelines. Adrian froze for half a second, then lowered his hand to her back, steadying her the way he wished someone had steadied Maris. Lena left. Adrian watched the car disappear down the street, the city swallowing it like it swallowed everything. But this time, the disappearance did not feel like loss alone. It felt like a line finally breaking free. That night, Adrian sat alone in his office overlooking the river. The city lights shimmered below like scattered coins, just as they had the night Lena ran into his club. He thought of Maris, and of the trap she built, and of the courage it took to fight monsters knowing you might not win. He thought of Lena, and of the way fear had shaped her, and the way safety might reshape her again. Adrian understood that the storm he had unleashed had not only torn down Roque. It had torn open something in Adrian himself. A place where guilt lived. A place where choices waited. He did not become a saint. He did not walk into the sunrise redeemed. But for the first time in years, he considered building something that didn't require children to run into danger just to find protection. Outside, the river kept moving, carrying reflections away. And somewhere far from the city, a little girl slept without listening for footsteps.